Jennifer, take it away.
Okay, we want to welcome all of you for joining us for this session. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here and be a part of this conference. And I have to thank my friend Liz Henderson for actually telling me about the conference and giving me an opportunity to participate with her here today. So thank you so much, Liz. I am Jennifer Taylor. I am a small scale farmer in the great state of Georgia. We grow using organic agroecology, farm strategies and practices to produce our organic certified vegetables and fruits and herbs that we grow all year long. We use cover crops, a lot of cover crops throughout the year too. And at Florida A&M University, I am an associate professor, and I developed our statewide small farm program. I'm here today because I believe that organic farming is more than just building relationships in care, well-being, and respect of the land, of the soil, the microorganisms, the beneficial insects, and the pollinators and wildlife. I believe that organic farming is more than the care and the work towards supporting healthy environments and healthy food systems. All these things are very important and critical. But I suggest to you today that organic living and organic agriculture is also about building good, healthy relationships and fairness and care and well-being for our families and for our farm workers and for the community of peoples that work with us to make our farms sustainable and profitable. Thank you. Liz?
Hi, I'm Liz Henderson. I've been a farmer since 1979 and a writer. My farm was one of the first community-supported agriculture farms. And with Robin Van En, I wrote the book, Sharing the Harvest, a guide to community-supported agriculture. And since I've retired recently, I've spent most of my time doing policy work with the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York and the Interstate Council. And I'm also NOFA's representative to the board of the Agricultural Justice Project and one of the founders of that project, which started in 1999 when we discovered that the National Organic Program didn't say anything about the social relations in organic agriculture. So I would really appreciate it if you would write your names in the Zoom chat. Be sure to write in the Zoom chat, not the WOVA chat. And then if you would write what kind of farmer training program, if any, you are involved with. Because the purpose of this training module is to familiarize farmers and would-be farmers with the legal requirements for hiring workers and what it takes to go beyond what is legal to labor practices and policies that are grounded in fairness. This curriculum can be used for several different kinds of training programs. Training programs for would-be farmers, so that when their farms get big enough to need hired workers, they start out fair. And also in the process of studying this module, also learn important things about their own rights as workers, since many would-be farmers work on farms and may actually never become yeoman farmers in the sense of independent landowners and may become farmers for hire. So they need to understand about fair contracts. Also for training programs for farmers who are already farming and training programs for new farmers. And this training can be adapted to cover worker-owned cooperative farms as well. So Jennifer, you want to explain how we're going to do this?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I thought I'd first maybe start out with a poem. Would that be okay, Liz? Okay.
Absolutely.
This is it's not a poem, let me say that. I'm calling it a poem because to me it's so heartfelt and reads so beautifully. However, it's actually lyrics from a song. It's called Innocent Lives by Common Hymnal. And it goes like this. Just to think of my little boys with dark hair and dark skin, how to tell them that they're not safe on the street. And for us, how to tell them that they are not safe on the farm. Where do I begin? To say justice is blind is a short-sighted lie. If color don't matter, why is color first to die? I am calling for change. To the injustice, stand and fight. I'm begging that we will set this right, that we won't lose more innocent lives. Just to think of all that's lost when violence steals a life. Oh, humanity, why do we become the ugly side? If we say nothing at all, we are endorsing the crime. It's time that we stand up and regard the human life. I am calling for change, through all injustice, stand and fight, and we will protect those innocent lives. And that's it. Thank you for the moment to hear such a thing. I just thought it was so beautiful. And you should go there and hear the song. It's so beautifully sung. So we have a treat for you today. And everybody has such a common, similar name. We're going to have to switch it up just a little bit here. But Liz and I thought that we would do something a little different here today. We will ask everybody to pause as you enter the space and breathe and release your identity, release your ID, okay? And what we would like for you to do is to take on the role of a small farmer, a large-scale farmer, and farm worker. And this is how it will work. This is how we thought it will work. So we're looking at last names in this case. I think all last names, first names are pretty similar, but last names have some change. Okay. And so the letter, if your last name, if your last name starts with the letter A through G, then for this session, you are in the role of a small farmer. Okay. Everyone whose name starts with the letter H, the last name starts with the letter H through J, you will be a large-scale farmer. And all the remaining alphabets from K through Z, you are farm workers, migrant workers, and sharecroppers. Did that divvy up everybody? Okay, great. So now everybody's role has been changed. Thumbs up if you are in the same role that you walked into this space earlier. When you came into this session, you were already a small farmer. Are you one now still? Nobody, okay. Anybody a large scale farmer that was one before they came into the room? Okay, or a migrant worker or farm worker? Anybody that was a farm worker before they came into the room? Okay. So as you hear Liz discuss the guidelines for living expressed in this training, and we're developing this training as we go, we ask that you react to the information that you hear from this new role and identity that you have in this space through the lens, so to speak, of your character. And as you have questions or if you have comments, we ask that you ask them with the voice and the lens of your new identity. And I now pronounce you small farmers, newly engaged small farmers, large scale farmers, and farm workers and migrant workers. You will have an opportunity to change back to your ID at the end of the session when we have our evaluations and take on your comments. But we ask that you remain in character as you speak and as you ask your questions. Thank you. Liz, can you proceed?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to do the training. Here we go. And please put your questions as we go along in the Zoom chat, not the other chat, the Zoom chat. So I'm so pleased to be with you today to expand your resources and about how to run more socially just farms. I speak to you today from unceded Seneca land in Rochester, New York. And I welcome our new custom of acknowledging that we are on stolen ground. We have so much to do to make amends, but at least it's good to be working on it all together. Please note that this is a short version of this training. Ideally, you would spend a full morning or even an entire day, which could result with farmers adapting our model handbook so that they would have a full employee handbook and come away with a full farm safety plan to take home and use on their farm. So for a farm to be sustainable, the farm needs a steady, well-trained labor force. And the products of the farm must bring a price in the marketplace that covers the cost of production, plus a living wage for the farmer, money to do repairs and maintenance, to pay for continuing education for the farm staff, and to make improvements to the farm. Many family-scale organic farmers have the best intentions, but under the day-to-day pressures of farming, do not take the time to learn all the relevant laws and regulations and to document their well-intentioned practices. The purpose of this training is to provide the concrete information and documentation a farmer needs to live up to the claim of social justice. So part one, the meaning of fairness. What do you think fairness on a farm means? I invite you to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. What does fairness mean for a farm? What has to be happening?
So the question is, in general, what does fairness on a farm look like?
Right. Yeah. What does the farm have to have in place so that fairness is the way the farm is operating?
As a small farmer, I would say, I would think about the employees. If I even had employees, probably at least have some staff helping at a farm stand and maybe on site some of the days of the week, depends how small my farm is. And thinking about them and making a living wage and getting value out of the work, knowing that some of it is hard, but enjoying it to a degree, and listening to their concerns and issues and talking out decisions on the farm, and care for the land and water, any resources there. I
That's
think
great.
that those would be my main concerns as a small farmer.
Lizzie, would you like to add anything to that?
I think she covered it pretty well. All the things, yeah. I especially like the piece about giving folks a voice in making the decisions about what's happening on the farm.
Well, I'm going to share my screen and share with you this is the iPhone principle of organic agriculture, and it's a really comprehensive statement about what fairness means. iPhone has 4 principles: ecology, care, health, and fairness. So organic agriculture should build on relationships that ensure fairness with regard to the common environment and life and opportunities. Fairness is characterized by equity, respect, justice, and stewardship of the shared world, both among people and in their relations to other human beings. So for iPhone, it's not just relations between human beings, but between human beings and all of the other creatures as well. And it means that all of the relationships in conducting work together or trade together are also characterized by fairness for everybody: farmers, workers, processors, distributors, traders, consumers. Everyone involved should have a good quality of life and contribute to food safety and the elimination of poverty So I think this is a really comprehensive understanding of fairness that is a helpful guide to thinking about what we need to have happening on our farms and in our agriculture in order to really live social justice. In the United States, we can't talk about fairness in the food system without first talking about systemic racism. There is no way to understand the way farmland is distributed and held, the way farm work is done and who does it, the way farm workers are treated and paid, the federal laws governing farm workers, without acknowledging the role of racism. Leah Penniman has written, from the early colonization of the Americas, our food system has been based on exploited labor and stolen land. The long history of oppressive systems goes back to the genocide of Native Americans, to the enslavement of people, to the takeover of Mexican territory and murder of Mexicans by the Texas Rangers, onto Black codes, convict leasing, and sharecropping. Without looking at that history, it's hard to understand why huge disparities in food access and land access exist right now. I think Leah, in the piece that was in Acres USA, has summed up what we need to confront as we think about all this. So let me go on to talking about workers' rights. In the resources for this conference, there is a section titled Documents. And in the documents, there's a document that's called Workers' Rights. There are actually 4 documents for this workshop. One is Safety Guide, one is Workers' Rights, and there's Farmers' Rights, and then there's Conflict Resolution. So I hope you'll take the time to unload all of those resources so that you will have them for use now and later. So I'm going to give you a quiz on workers' rights to see how up to speed you are on these issues. Please use the raise hand function. It's down at the bottom. There's a little section called that lets you raise your hand. So if you click on that, if you think that what I say, you agree with it, if it's right, raise your hand. If you don't agree, don't do anything. Just sit there, okay? So first question. A farmer employer fires a worker. The only reason the employer gives is that the worker wears purple too often. Does the employer have the right to do that? Raise your hand if you think the employer has the right. I don't see any hands going up. Nobody thinks the employer has the right? Well, unfortunately, the employer does have the right. As 49 of the 50 states of the United States are at-will law states. And under at-will law, an employer can fire somebody just like that. Okay, all right. Question 2. A farmer asks one of the workers to switch to a different work site, which makes the commute to work much longer. The worker refuses. The employer fires her. Does the employer have the right to do that? Raise your hand if you think the employer has the right. Okay, I think hands are going up. Exactly. Under at-will law, refusing to go to a different work site is reason enough to fire somebody. Does anybody know what the limitations are, the legal limitations to at-will law? Can anybody explain what they are? Because there are some limitations. Well, the limitations are you can't fire someone for racial discrimination or ethnic discrimination. You can't fire someone for being too old. And you can't fire someone because they're sick. And there are some other kind of detailed limitations. But in general, employer has that freedom. And of course, the reciprocal freedom, the worker has the right to leave at any time. But of course, usually in what used to be normal times, it put all the power in the hands of the employer. So, third question. A farm worker breaks one of the tines of a digging fork while digging a bed for vegetables at a farm. The employer deducts the value of a new fork from the worker's pay. Does the employer have the right to make that deduction? Raise your hand if you think the employer has the right. Lizzie, you're not raising your hand. What do you think?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I feel like maybe yes, but I'm just, yeah, I don't know.
Does anybody know what the real answer, the right answer is to that? Well, it's that, that there are set deductions that an employer can legally make from workers' pay. FICA, Social Security, that's FICA payments. But you can't just add other deductions. If an employee asks that deductions be made, say for divorce payments, then, and it's in the interest of the employee to have that deduction made, then the employer can also make that deduction. But you can't just arbitrarily add deductions. Okay, question 4. Okay. A worker who quits before getting paid for the week cannot claim employment for the week already worked before quitting. Raise your hand if you agree. Good. I see no hands going up. Of course, a worker can claim to be paid for the work they've already worked. An employer can't let you work a week and then fire you and not pay you. That even under American law, that's nonsense. Okay. Next question. Employers can require a week of free labor to test and observe whether a worker can do the job. What do you think? Raise your hand if you think an employer can do that. A week of free labor. Good. No one thinks that's possible. No, that is really wage theft of the worst exploitive kind. Okay, next question. An employer can fire a worker if the employer received a notice from the Social Security Administration indicating that the worker gave them a bad Social Security number. Can an employer fire somebody for that reason? Raise your hand if you think they can. One of the Lizzes, Liz or Lizzie, want to explain why you think so?
Only that it sounds illegal to do that, so I would think that they could legally fire someone, but I haven't heard of it happening.
No. If you're not supposed to hire someone who doesn't have proper documents, and if you knowingly do that, it's a felony. So if you learn that someone isn't a citizen or doesn't have a green card, you can fire them. So we're playing a game, and since you came in later, we're going to ask you to pretend that you are a farm worker, because the other people are acting that they are farmers and taking this training. So we want you to respond to these questions as though you were a farm worker. Okay, Will you play with us? So I'm asking a series of questions, and we want you to raise your hand if you think the answer should be yes. Okay, an undocumented worker can claim unemployment insurance. Can they? Can they make that claim? I don't see any hands going up. You're all right. No, they can't. They don't get unemployment insurance. Next question. A worker who does not work directly with chemicals or pesticides does not need to know what materials are in use on the farm. What do you think? Do they need to know? Raise your hand.
Was the question if they need to be informed or if they don't need to be informed?
They need to be informed. Even if they don't personally spread those chemicals. Lizzie, you want to explain why you think they need to be informed?
I think of that as one that is tightly regulated, and if you're going to be out in the field or harvesting or anywhere nearby, you have to be trained on it or informed. I would hope. A lot of these I hope for, and the opposite is true, so just not sure.
I think the legal training is that the people who are using it and the people who are close to it have to be trained. But fairness would require that everybody is trained. Everybody needs to know what's being used on the farm and to which they might be exposed. So next question. When a worker receives her paycheck, she has a new deduction from her pay. She goes to her supervisor and asks what the deduction is for. Does the worker have the right to ask? Raise your hand if you think she has the right. Absolutely. You have the right to know what deductions are about on your own paycheck. Very good. Okay. Next question. Workers who are injured on the job must pay a private, that is your own doctor, for their medical treatment. Is this right? Do you have to pay for your medical treatment if it's an on-the-job injury? Raise your hand if that's correct. Ever heard of workers' comp? Farms in most states are supposed to have workers' compensation, and that pays for an on-the-job industry. In some states, people aren't covered. And in some states, nobody has to be covered. But in the Northeast states, all of the states require workers' compensation. Okay, last question. And this is a tricky one. Oh, here's somebody else who wants to get in. Good. Okay. Federal law and most state laws do not guarantee agricultural workers the right to time and a half for overtime. A worker on a farm spends a week driving a truck to make deliveries, assisting in the farm office, and selling food at the farmer's market stand, and puts in altogether 50 hours of work that week. Should that worker expect time and a half for the 10 hours over 40 hours a week? Can anyone answer that question? Should they get overtime or not?
They won't receive overtime, but should they is another question, right? That's what you're asking?
Does everybody agree with that?
I mean, in New York, at least.
That's right. In New York, that would be so. And in California, also so. But actually, it's somewhat more complicated than that. Let's see. Get the next. This is the federal definition of farm work, and it covers all of the things that we think about as basic farm work. working soil, cultivating, harvesting, raising livestock, animals, poultry, any practices connected with that, including cutting trees or cutting lumber, anything performed on a farm and incident to the work on that farm. So this is the federal definition of farm work. But each state interprets and enforces that a little differently. So whether a worker is entitled to time and a half or overtime depends on both the federal and the state definitions of farm work. So in some states, if you are driving a delivery truck, packing vegetables, but they're not from your own farm, but they're from some other farm, and you're selling at a farmer's market, but the stand has not only your farm stuff, but stuff from another farm, then you are not doing pure farm work. So the employer has to pay you time and a half, and they have to pay you differently from the work when you're on the farm and the work that is non-farm work. So in a legal guide to the business of farming in Vermont, attorney Annette Higbee helps us understand the federal law. She says the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLISA, uses a two-pronged definition of agriculture that includes both primary agricultural activities as well as those activities that are secondary or incidental to carrying out the farming enterprise. So agriculture, and thus the exemption, also includes agriculture activities that are secondary to the farming operation. So if you're doing lumber work and it's part of your own farm, that's farm work. But if you're working for a company that does lumber work for farms, then it isn't farm work. You're working for a different company. So it's a little bit complicated, and it's something you need to pay very careful attention to when you are deciding to how much you're going to pay people. So workers engaged in agricultural employment for 100% of the work week are what they call exempt from the overtime. But if it's more complicated and they're doing other work or they're doing work for another farm, then they do have to be paid time and a half for that overtime work. So here's a quick review of the basic rights that a worker has: to be paid minimum wage and overtime, to work free from discrimination based on race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, being pregnant, or age, to have a safe workplace that does not pose a risk to your health or safety, and to get workers' compensation if you're injured on the job or get sick because of work. In most of the Northeast states, that insurance is sold privately. In New York State, there's state and private insurance sold, but the farm has to pay for that insurance. And finally, to work free from sexual harassment. All workplace rights apply to all workers, whether they're documented or undocumented. So even undocumented workers have these basic rights. And they must be paid for all the time that is the actual farm work. Traveling to work doesn't have to be paid, but traveling within work. So if it takes you an hour to get from one field to another field, your employer has to pay you for that travel time because it's part of your work. And an employer cannot make deductions from your wages except those required by law, taxes, child support, or you have agreed in writing to have those deductions made. And as we said, the time and a half is more complicated than that. The other thing that all farm workers have to have is a written document that details what their work is about. It has to have their social security number, the employee's social security number, their address, their birth date, their age, their sex, their occupation, when the work week begins, the number of hours worked, the total hours worked, the basis on which they're being paid, the regular hourly wage, the total earnings that they've had, the total overtime, all deductions, the total wages, and the day of payment and the pay period covered by that payment. So there is a required pay stub for agricultural workers that every farm has to provide. And finally, workers have the right to concerted action, to, as two people or as a group, to approach your employer to discuss things that are problems on the job for you. And the employer cannot interfere with or coerce you from exercising that right. And this is true whether you are in a union or not. Of course, this is not well enforced. You can make a complaint to the worker relations board, and they may or may not follow up. It might take them a few years, but you do have the right to concerted action. So I've been covering the things that are the basic responsibilities, legal responsibilities for a worker. And these things are all covered in these federal laws: the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act. These things are all on that handout that I provided on workers' rights. And then there are certain documents that an employer has to fulfill to be a legal employer. An employer has to keep an I-9 file for every employee. You have to fill out a W-4 and update it annually and provide it to the employers. To have that work agreement that I outlined for you, and to keep detailed payroll work records of all of this information, paying either weekly or every 2 weeks, and paying in cash, not in some kind of script or promise. You have to actually pay that money. And an employer has to have an EIN, an employer identification number. So that's what the basics require. And now what I'd like to talk about is going beyond what's legal to what makes a farm fair. We'll examine the policies and the practices that really make a place a much more worthwhile place to work for than one that is just sticking to the letter of the law. And this is especially important for how a whole farm operates, people's spirit in working at the place, the quality of life that everybody enjoys. And it's also important for taking care of the planet, because that's a job that requires everybody's attention, and no one individual can really cover all the things that need to be done in order to make a farm as climate friendly as possible. So the first thing I wanted to address in fairness is an employer has to recognize the right of the workers to freedom of association. This does not require unionization, but it does require that the workers have the freedom to unionize if they want to, or if they just want to go with one other worker to talk to the employer, or as an individual to raise issues about conditions at work, wages, any of the things that could come up at a workplace. So recognizing that freedom of association is really basic for a fair workplace. Okay, now I'm going to go on to issues of safety. So fair workplace, as someone noted at the beginning when we discussed this, fair workplace is a safe workplace. And one of the things, the handouts, is a guide to health and safety. In thinking about safety, I think we need to think about it in the broadest terms. The many different levels and of the kinds of dangers that you may encounter in farming. In writing your farm safety plan, you need to assess these dangers and then plan for how you're going to deal with these things, and then how you're going to train everybody to be ready in case any of those things happen. And it has to apply to both the farm and the farm family, to the workers, to any volunteers, and to visitors who come to the farm. And if you have children on the farm, your own workers' children or visiting children, you have to take special care for their safety, because every year there are children injured and who die on farms for farmers allowing stupid things like giving a child a ride on a tractor and they slip off and fall under it. So the handout is the checklist guide to safety training for farm employees. Have you been able to get a hold of that handout? It's in the documents section, the resources documents, and it's the very first handout. It's a long list of all of the possible things that could be dangerous on the farm, and it will help you create a safety plan. So whether you have that list or not, let's just take one of the headings, noise. What would you do to make your farm safe against noise pollution? Just one idea. What would you need to have available on the farm?
I don't know if this is too detailed, but earplugs or some sort of
Sure.
something for the individual to wear? Okay.
Right. Earplugs and people who know where they are and know when they have to wear them. So that would be part of your plan. It might also be if there's big noise from equipment and the housing for the workers is fairly close from that, you might want to have some kind of way of protecting the housing from the noise of the equipment, or protecting neighbors from that noise. But you can take this whole list and walk around your farm and see what the problems are and make a plan. And once you have a plan for safety, you need to provide training so that the people who are on your farm are trained to keep themselves safe. And you know, the question is, when are the best times to do the training? Usually it's when people arrive at the beginning of the season, but if people come spaced out over different times, you might need to have several different trainings. And then it's probably always a good idea to have a review of the training at the beginning or the end of the season, and just talk about problems that came up and things you can all do to make it better. And I just want to call your attention to, the New York Center for Agricultural Health and Medicine, NICAMP. In the resources, there is the link to that website. They have resources on all possible farm hazards, things that you would think of, things you would never think of. They have these resources in English and in Spanish. And if you're in New York State and some of the neighboring states, they will actually come to your farm and provide a training for you and neighbor farms. And sometimes they have grants that they give out that will help pay for the equipment you need to make your farm a safer place. So it's really an important resource to know about. So other issues in safety, sexual harassment. There are a lot of good resources now in sexual harassment. This used to be something that just kind of slid through. Fortunately now it's been carefully defined in law and people are paying a lot more attention. But here's a pretty good thorough attention. It's conduct that's either explicitly or implicitly, and it's having a statement that you reject this conduct, that it's not allowed on your farm, and that the conduct has the purpose or effect of interfering with people's work performance and creating an intimidating and hostile or offensive work environment. So let's see. Here is NICAP, by the way. Sorry, I have these out of order. Then I'm going to go on to another issue in safety training, which is thinking about ergonomics and how you design things on your farm. As physical workers, you need to keep your own body in good condition and make sure that everybody who works on the farm uses their body in a healthy way. So you don't bend over to pick something up. You use your knees when you pick up something heavy. So equity in design is so important for this. You've probably seen the meme of people looking over a fence, and for the tall person, it's easy to look, but the short person needs something to stand on. So that's how we need to think about designing equipment and the workplace at a farm. My farm partner and I had two different sinks in our wash-up area because he was a foot taller than I was. So if I tried to work at his sink, it would hurt my arms, and if he worked at mine, he'd get a sore back. So designing things for people's comfort is really very important. Another area is mental health. The basics to having a good day on the farm is being treated with respect, to have clear expectations, and a recognition of your individual aspirations and your particular personality and way of doing things and understanding things. So when you write guidelines, an employee handbook for your farm, you are really addressing people's mental health, because you are making clearer for yourself as an employer what it is you expect for everybody on the farm and helping everybody else understand what you expect so that it's clear and written for everybody. So let's go on to another area of fairness. It's paying not just a minimum wage, it's paying a fair wage, a living wage. These are the minimum wages by state for the Northeast states. In New York State, in 2021, it's $13.20. Upstate, where I am, downstate, where you are in New York City, I think it's already $15 an hour. But is $15 an hour a living wage in New York City? What do you think a living wage would be in New York City? Liz Corona, can you tell us? What does someone need to actually live on?
I mean, are legally or not legally? What's the,
No, to be fair. Well,
oh,
what's
this is
someone
the
need?
minimum wage, and what would be the living wage? Definitely more
Right.
than 15. Yeah, closer to 20.
More like 20. Mm-hmm.
I would think so, to live here.
I think upstate in Wayne County where I live, you could get along on 15 pretty well. If people haven't been making that much. 15 would be an improvement. Federal and state wage and hour laws protect workers' right to be paid for all the hours that they work. And basically it requires a minimum wage be paid. Agricultural employees are allowed to pay piecework. Do people know what that is? What piecework means? Lizzie, you want to say, you shook your hand, yes. What is piecework?
Just getting paid for like per bushel of apple or whatever the product is rather than an hourly wage.
It's by the pound or the number or some kind of integer like that. Do you think being paid piecework is fair?
It doesn't likely come with a lot of protections or benefits or security. But maybe somebody would like to have some version of work like that, but I think overall probably it takes advantage of the worker, would be my guess.
Well, for a young, healthy worker, they might make more being paid by the piece. But for older people or anybody who's sick, they need an hourly wage. And then a fairer way to recognize exceptional speed would be to pay the hourly wage plus some kind of bonus for faster picking. Doesn't that sound a little more fair? So living wage is not a specific wage all over the country. And there are very good calculators for helping you figure out what a living wage would be. The Agricultural Justice Project on our website has a calculator, but there's also the MIT living wage calculator. And there are many localities that have already calculated what a minimum wage, what a living wage is. So you can look it up. And if you can't pay a living wage, what makes it fair would be to work together with the people who are on your farm to make a plan for getting to where everybody can make a living wage. So the Agricultural Justice Project includes in the living wage adequate nutrition, clothing and sanitary needs, health care, child care, transportation, housing and utilities, plus some savings. Okay, another aspect of fairness is having really good evaluations. Evaluations that aren't just one way, but where there's an opportunity for mutual evaluations. The best evaluations set goals for what the employer expects and objectives, not just for the practical work, but for the professional development of the employees as well. For many employers, evaluations are just about what the company needs. But a fair evaluation has an aspect of the personal aspirations of the individual included on it. So make space in that evaluation conversation for how are they doing? What do they aspire to? What training would they like? What additional skills would they like to acquire? So that care for someone as an individual will make them much more committed and much likely to stay and continue working on your farm. Particularly if you speak to the issues between evaluation periods. An evaluation is not just a gotcha kind of session. And if you also give a chance in the evaluation for the employee to say how they've experienced your management, you will grow as a manager and learn things as well, and not take that personally and retaliate. So have a two-way evaluation. And the final issue that I wanted to talk about is conflict resolution. I think that every workplace needs to have a conflict resolution process. As the Olympia Washington Food Co-op people say, conflict is inevitable when people work together. There is going to be conflict. We're not clones with one another. Little conflicts or big conflicts can be based on race, upbringing, differences of opinion, differences of income, educational differences. There's so many things that can lead to conflict. Just seeing different ends of the elephant. Treat one another with respect. Use a respectful tone in speaking. And try to deal with that conflict in a place that's calm and neutral. You'll have a much better chance for resolving the conflict. And in the handouts, there is a sample model conflict resolution process that involves you talk the conflict over with the person who's directly involved. then you define what the conflict is. If you two can't resolve it, then you find somebody else, the supervisor or the farmer, to have a session with you where you try to resolve it. And if you can't resolve that, then actually have a mediation. In New York State and in some other states, agricultural mediations from the Center for Dispute Settlement are actually free. So any issue that's an agricultural issue, you can get a trained mediator who will come in and make you listen to one another and come to an agreement, to write that out, and then to check back to see if you're actually living up to it. That's a basic way of resolving conflicts. But of course, there are many others that can be used. And there are some farms that have some really outstanding and creative things that they're using. And you can find the materials in the Agricultural Justice Toolkit. Relational farming is one of them. I really love that way of defining what we're doing. It's not just the work that we're doing, that it's how we're working at it together. Real talk, where at least once a month you take the time to have each person meet with each other person to talk about how you're doing, and then courageous conversations. So we have some resources for this if you want to explore them. And finally, in the toolkit, the Agricultural Justice Project has a model employee handbook. So if you would like that handbook, please put your name in the chat and I will send you a copy to it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And now we're going to go on to questions and answers. Jennifer, could you kind of conduct this session?
Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Liz. I learned so much. I have a question, and I don't know if I missed it or not, but is there any kind of regulation about providing good, I'll use the word good housing for farm workers or migrant workers?
That's really on the state level. It's not federal law.
Uh-huh.
So some states have fairly strong regulations about housing.
Mm-hmm.
The regulations for housing H2A, that is guest workers, are actually in New York State are stronger than the regulations for local farm workers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're providing housing for someone who's, you know,
Yeah.
a domestic worker,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it might be inspected, it might not.
Mm-hmm.
H2A housing is inspected every year in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they're fairly careful about housing in California as well.
Mm-hmm.
But housing for small farms often escapes anybody's attention.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I know from farm worker organizers that, for example, on small scale dairies, where there are only a couple of workers housed in trailers, the housing could be really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And no one does anything about it.
Right, right.
I don't know about Georgia or Florida.
I don't know either, but I just wondered, I saw that kind of missing in the information. I wondered how that, fit, or was there a fit for that? Uh-huh.
Under the Agricultural Justice Project standards, we require that housing be kept at a comfortable temperature,
Mm-hmm.
that it be safe and clean, that the
Mhm.
person who lives there be free from intrusive barging in by their employers or supervisors,
Right.
that they have the right to have guests.
Yes. That is so wonderful. And how good that must make I would think, the employer feel about doing good towards another person, and not doing the least common denominator for a person, but actually trying to do good on behalf of their workers.
In New York
Do we have
State,
any, I'm sorry. Do we have any other questions?
Let's see, are there any questions in the chat? Or Lizzie, do you have, Thea, any questions?
Yeah, I think thank you, Liz. That was really informative and helpful. I guess my one question in the beginning, you mentioned that you had been doing policy work and thinking about these policies. So I'm just curious of the kind of thinking about fair standards. What are some of the either state in New York State? I noticed that the New York now requires overtime over 60 hours, things like that. I'm just wondering what your most kind of the biggest levers that you're thinking about realistically, either state or nationally, for making farm labor more fair.
Well, I wish our movement would really get it together and get the federal government to change the National Labor Relations Act so that farm workers and domestic workers are no longer excluded. That would be the quickest way to take care of the whole country.
Yeah.
New York State now requires time and a half for overtime over 60 hours a week. And there will be a meeting of the wage board in the next month, I believe, to hear farmer and farm worker opinion about whether that should be changed. In California, they have been working their way over the past 5 years down to requiring time and a half for overtime over 40 hours. And I believe for large farms, they're finally hitting that this year. And for smaller farms, it'll be a couple more years. But most other states do not require time and a half for overtime for farm work. So as part of something like the Build Back Better, we should change the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act.
Thank you.
So any other specific questions? Otherwise, I would really ask for your evaluation of this training, both from you, Lizzie, and Thea, and Jennifer, you as well.
Okay.
Put your trainer hats back on. So what did you learn from this training? Did you learn anything?
Yeah, it was really helpful to have all of this information compiled in one place to be able to refer to and use and think about with the decisions. We don't operate our own farm, but we get a lot of questions. So just to be able to support farmers and farm workers that we may be working with, I think that was most useful. And if we're going into evaluation, I really appreciated the way that you're bringing in us all as being like asking questions from someone's perspective. And I thought that was a really fun way to cover this topic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I would say I really enjoyed the interactive piece of having to think through the questions, because you can think, oh yeah, I understand how this works and I know that overtime isn't included, but then when you give the actual hypotheticals about some of those other pieces like at-will employment or things that kind of apply across the board, but you haven't thought about in the context of farm workers. So I thought that was really helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Who do you think benefits from fair labor practices?
Everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I've thought about, and I know there are some food safety topics covered around on-farm food safety.
Yeah.
And I guess I have been doing a lot of thinking. So my background is actually in food service and like restaurants. And I feel like there's a lot of injustices I see also in the food system in that part, in the processing part and of the food system, and restaurants in general, food production, or like that next step. And I've definitely thought a lot about sort of the intersection between like public health and labor practices, on-farm labor practices, and some of the food safety things that they have people doing to help with food safety further down the line, I feel like could be prevented if there was more on-farm
Mhm.
safe practices. Like there's some pretty outrageous, really harsh chemicals and intense sterilization in some ways of
Mhm.
food because of unsafe conditions in the
Mhm.
field or at the site. That if we were able to address that, I think that would have also just like not only have a tremendous impact on the humans that are working on these farms, but then also just on the greater community. Like,
So true. Yeah, I agree.
When farm workers got together, the Agricultural Justice Project and the Domestic Fair Trade Association actually organized 2 national gatherings over a period of 5 years of farm worker organizations. And for them, what ranked really high in fairness was being free from toxic materials.
yeah, and then also I think about like a paid just protected leave, like or like sick leave. Like
Hmm.
I think that happens a lot in restaurants, and
Right.
I'm sure it also happens on the farm that you can't afford to not work. Like you have to go in if you have like the reason that hepatitis is spreading in a restaurant is because people are going into work sick because they can't afford not to. Um, and it's creating a dangerous condition for them and their families and everyone else that could be prevented if there was a way to support sick leave and preventative health care. Um,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Liz. I think I'm going to make you the host. I have to duck out, but it will continue recording while you guys finish your talk.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Thea.
Yeah.
both.
Thank you.
So Thea, I would appreciate any other thoughts that you have about this training and how we could make it better.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any with his, I don't know if I have any solid set feedback. That is
Okay.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How about you, Lizzie? Any ways that we could make this a stronger training?
No, I think just having more farmers in the space, but obviously that was out of your control in this particular training. So I would just be curious to see how the dynamic is in that space, and maybe getting more pushback, or folks that if they hear one thing that doesn't kind of jive with their own, like,
Exactly.
I can't imagine doing that on my farm, it's too out of reach, either pay or one of those things, just kind of if they're able to stay engaged. Because obviously all those things sound really great to me, but if I have a lot of differing priorities and I'm thinking about the viability of my my farm and what have you, just how to keep folks engaged in that.
Thank you.
With the education you're getting at Tufts, what are you thinking of doing?
Yeah, I would love to work with farmers in some kind of capacity, educational capacity, either through like a cooperative extension or like a state department, like coordinating. I guess that's a slightly different kind of in that niche of food systems work within either of those two entities, or also in a nonprofit that works with farmers, of which there are many wonderful ones represented at this conference. So, yeah.
Right. Thank
Have you worked on a farm yourself before?
I have a small scale, like vegetable, more of a garden, but called a farm. But then when I did the gleaning work, we would go onto a number of different farms to harvest their seconds of primarily apple orchards in Pennsylvania.
Mm.
Mhm.
Jennifer, do you have any suggestions about the training? Any thoughts that you have?
Oh, let's see. I don't know of anything so much different that we could do, other than if more people were in the room, you know, that whole dialogue and exchange would have, I think, would have been broader. But perhaps, but I can't think of anything else right now, but I'll be thinking and let you know if I think of something.
Okay, great.
Yeah. What about you, Liz? Having gone through it now, how do you think? Do you think anything could have been different or better or changed?
It's hard for me to evaluate what I'm doing while I'm doing it, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
I would,
yeah,
I'm
I would have
sorry.
enjoyed a bigger audience.
Yeah, a bigger audience would have been interesting for the dialogue, you know, intersecting. But and then an in-person dialogue, I think, session would be impactful too, you know, with the assigned roles and going through everything and taking time for information to digest and people to come up with their own questions too.
I've done a full day, like 6 hours,
Okay.
that I call 5 steps to a fair farm,
Okay.
where we spend time on each of those headings.
Uh-huh.
And in the ergonomics session, we actually do some exercises and stretches
Okay.
so that people get an idea of things that you can do to stretch your back.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So have you ever done this workshop with migrant workers and farm workers
No,
as a primary population? I think that would be interesting interplay
that
and
would be very
knowledge
interesting.
sharing, you know, on your part to share the knowledge and to hear the interaction and hear how they feel about the information that probably their employer is not doing, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, to hear their rights. That's what they would be hearing at that point.
I
Their
think
rights.
that Kata, which is one of the members of the Agricultural Justice Project,
Yes.
does that kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
They do trainings on workers' rights.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of worker centers that do that around the
Yeah.
country as well.
Yeah, that's great. Great.
Well, I guess we should call it a day with this.
Okay.
Everybody's left us. So
Great job, Liz. Great job. That was wonderful. Thank you.
okay. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for
Yes.
being the very gracious hostess. And I love the poem, the song. I need to get and hear the music.
You need to hear it, Liz. It's so beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Send me a link.
I will. I'll send you the link.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to save the chat.
Yeah, save the chat before you go out.
Got it.